reactor vessel out to these steam generator vessels and back again, and it does it through these very large diameter pipes, which look kind of small there, but only because those vessels are really big. These are about 3 feet diameter pipes, so these are sizable. And suppose you had a double-ended guillotine break of one of those coolant pipes. The thing just all of a sudden, you forgot to weld the ends, drops out, and you lose all your primary water in a hurry, and you uncover the core. So to compensate for that possibility, as small as it is, the designers had to add these active safety systems that would inject water under high pressure and all kinds of circumstances to make sure the core stayed covered. So if you want to avoid that, what do? You get rid of the large pipes. And you do that with an integral primary reactor system, like this happens to be Iris here. But you can see I've taken all of these components here, and I've now packaged them into a single reactor vessel. So here's your core. Water comes up, the primary water up through there, up through these are just control rod drive mechanisms here. They circulate through the internal coolant pumps, down through heat exchangers, steam generators inside the vessel, down the downcomer, and then back up through the core. And here's your pressurizer up here to keep the pressure stability of the whole system intact. So now you've eliminated all those big pipes, and the only thing you have coming in and out of that vessel are these small steam outlet and feed water inlet pipes, which are like 2 or 3 inch diameter instead of the 3 feet diameter. And those pertain only to the secondary side, not the primary coolant. So you've eliminated the possibility of that double-ended pipe break, large pipe break LOCA. You also, because now the vessel had to grow in order to accommodate all these other components, you have your entire primary system inventory of coolant inside the vessel, which gives it a much greater thermal inertia to little heat-up transients, which means the system's going to respond much slower to the transients than the traditional PWR. And there's a whole another host of issues, gains there. But with the penalty that you pay is you can't make this a high-power reactor because you're constrained, in this case, by the diameter of that vessel, something that you can make and transport. Otherwise, it would just grow too big. So it is deliberately small, and it's constrained by the size of the vessel that you could make. Again, there's a long litany of benefits of smaller components. One of the reasons, actually, the Democratic administration this year has gotten kind of interested in small reactors is the fact that the big plants, pretty much that capability to fabricate the big plants, particularly the large metal forgings that make up these big vessels, have moved offshore. In fact, there's only one company in the world that can do that. So with the smaller plants, we have the opportunity to fabricate those entirely in-house. And then there's the ease of moving the smaller components around. There's the advantage of building them in a factory and assembling on-site as opposed to actually constructing on-site. Huge cost savings there. Transport, smaller footprint since they're physically smaller. Again, I'm talking about single units. If you have a bunch of these gangs, well, then you kind of lose some of that. But since it's smaller, it's more economical to put it below grade, which protects it, gives it extra physical protection from, say, airplane impact, and also makes seismic isolation more viable, which would offer additional siting options or reduce the impact of earthquakes. Let's see what else we've got. Operational flexibilities. The chart there on the right is just a plot of power generating units around the world. These are all global power generating units of all types, meaning hydro, coal, gas, everything. It's just the number of units and their size output. And what you see are, 93% of all power plants are less than 500 megawatts. You say, well, so what? That doesn't mean that they're better, but it does mean that utilities are used to working with power generating units of that size. And it's important to them because of grid stability. If you have very large units, in fact, the rule of thumb is you wouldn't want any one generator on your grid to be generating more than about 10% of the total capacity of the grid. Otherwise, if that drops out, you've got real grid stability problems. So they're used to working with smaller chunks, and they know how to manage that and distribute that on the grid. So there are a lot of familiarity issues as well as just the physical stability of the grid. And of course, in smaller chunks, you can match the demand growth easier than you could with a single large lump. Turns out there's a huge economic penalty in building excess power, even if you do have reasonable commitments for purchase of that excess power. It still can be very costly and makes you very vulnerable to market fluctuations. So if you can match your demand growth, that's the best option. Okay, let's get into the economics, because this is really important, and this is the one thing that a lot of people question the viability of the small plants, and rightly so from our past experience. So there's really, I've listed 3, there's probably more than that, economic factors to consider, but one is total project cost, and that is actually one of the drivers today for consideration of these small plants. Initially, and a couple of years ago when I was doing the grid appropriate reactor activity, which was focused more on export opportunities, and we were looking at a lot of the new countries, what we call new entrant countries. Some people refer to them to developing countries that are looking to introduce nuclear power. They had definite constraints on what they could afford and what they could finance, and so the small plants, this was a huge driver for them. In fact, about over 60% of the countries that wanted to consider introducing nuclear power would be constrained to plants of the smaller size. The cost of electricity is important. It needs to be comparative to the alternatives in that environment. So like Galena, Alaska, I mean, our cost of electricity is 3-4 cents kilowatt hour. In Galena, it's more